Hi everyone, John from LookSmart Home Inspections right here in New Jersey. And I want to talk to you guys today about mold in homes and mold found during home inspections. So I kind of want to bring the two pieces together today. So first of all, what is mold? So mold is a fungus. And for mold to grow, we do need high moisture. We need some type of moisture source. Now, whether that be from, say, a direct source like a plumbing leak or water entry into a basement, direct source, or we can have an indirect source, right? Like high moisture just building up in a basement or an attic that provides the moisture necessary for the mold to grow. So, in any event, mold indicates moisture. That's really the crux of the problem. And it's interesting in New Jersey here that home inspectors were not required to inspect for mold. We're not required to inspect or report on, mold conditions. But I think it's really important to do so. Mold is a really hot button today. Insurance companies have problems with insuring homes with mold. Mold claims are kind of a big deal. And so it's really important for a home inspector to have a good grasp on what to look for when they enter a home, regarding mold. What does it look like? What does it smell like? And most of all, why is it there? Where is the moisture, coming from? And this is really, really important. I do inspect for and look for mold. I'm certified in mold inspection and testing. And I just think it's really important to do that and to let your client know about, potential problems in the home, regarding this hot button topic, mold in the house. It's super important. So where do we find mold in homes? A majority of the mold that we find in homes are generally going to be in the basement. And the next area is going to be the attic. So in the basement, it's we're subterranean, and most homes in New Jersey either have a basement or a crawl space. And a lot of the times it's neglected. People don't spend a lot of time in their basement or their crawl space. So we find often mold growth on the walls or on the framing in the basement, right? So we'll be looking for any type of organic growth on the walls of the basement or the foundation walls. And the interesting, mold can come in different colors, but the majority of mold in a basement is going to be sort of a black or green type of mold. And the mold that we typically find in this type of scenario, even on the basement framing, and also in crawl spaces, on the space walls, and on the framing in the crawl space, is a mold called cladosporium. And this mold is in the black mold family, and it can be mycotoxic to people who have vulnerabilities to mold. So it's important that we look for it for sure. So basements are they're a harbinger for water entry and for high moisture conditions, either through water entry into the basement or the crawl space through the foundation walls or under the floor slab. Maybe the home doesn't have a proper, water control system. And even if it does, that still doesn't prevent mold from growing. A lot of times we'll find mold even in homes that have a proper, basement water control system. So still, you got to be on your toes for sure. Same thing holds true for crawl spaces. A lot of these crawl spaces are just damp and musty, and they've had water infiltration in the past, and there's no dehumidification a lot of the times, either in the basement or the crawl space. And dehumidification is super important because we want to keep our moisture levels in the air, humidity, about under 50% humidity in the basement or crawl space air. And this is often neglected because if we have high moisture in the basement, and sometimes you go into a basement and it just feels that heavy weight of the humidity in the basement, especially in the summer months. And a simple fix is to run one or two dehumidifiers that are piped out, that are going to continuously try to keep that moisture levels at bay in the air and also in the crawl space. So don't neglect that. If you're looking for a house for sure, make sure that they're running a dehumidifier in the basement or crawl space. And just because they have one doesn't mean that there is an overly drastic problem. It could mean that they're just doing what they should be doing and keeping humidity levels low. So watch out for that. Another area of mold vulnerability obviously is bathrooms, right? Because this is where a lot of the moisture happens in a house because we run a shower, right? We take a hot shower. That moisture and steam has to go somewhere. So if we look closely at the walls or the ceiling, sometimes we'll see organic growth on those areas of the bathroom, and sometimes also around the bathroom vent fan. So it's super important for your bathroom. We look for this during New Jersey home inspections to be vented to the outside. And I know that if there is a window, technically we don't need a bathroom fan. I always recommend to the client puts a fan in the bathroom if at all possible. Because if it's January or February, I mean, realistically, how many of you guys are going to be opening your window? Probably almost zero. So a bathroom fan is going to take that moisture and it's going to pump that moisture to the outside. We don't want, of course, that moisture being pumped to the attic space because that opens up another whole problem where we're putting that moisture from the bathroom up to the attic, and then we're creating conditions that are conducive to mold up in the attic space. So avoid that at all costs. That's almost worse as not having a bathroom fan at all. So bathrooms are another hot area, obviously to look for mold. Another area that is concerning also is, especially in basements and in attics, is areas where there's storage packed together. And if we have high moisture and we have storage packed together, I'll try to move some of those boxes, and good home inspectors will try to look behind some of that storage, especially like in closets in basements and in the attic if it's packed full of storage, because storage prevents air movement. And wherever there's high moisture and lack of air movement, we can have a mold problem. So it always pays to have the home inspector try to move some of those items if possible. Look, we're not movers as home inspectors, but if there's some light storage or we can move some boxes and just look behind things, I think that's really advantageous. And we certainly want to, be doing that and helping our client as best we can. The next area where we find mold a lot is attics. And attics, often mold is present, and it has to do really with the moisture from the home. And we were just talking about bathrooms not venting properly, and sometimes the bathrooms venting into the attic space, which is something that we want to certainly look for on a home inspection. Sometimes the kitchens will also vent into the attic space. And that's another thing. We don't want to have that. And sometimes the kitchens in a home will just have a recirculating vent fan. And these things are basically, glorified noisemaker because they're just recirculating that. Yes, there's cleanable filters and they're doing a little something, but they're not really taking the moisture from the kitchen and bringing it out to the outside as if, as best practice. So those are two moisture makers that home inspectors in New Jersey are going to look for to see if the bathrooms are vented out and to see how the kitchen is ventilated, if at all. So that high moisture from the home ends up in the attic space. And if the attic space is poorly vented, especially in newer homes, and home inspectors here in New Jersey will look for proper ventilation as far as proper soffit ventilation, gable ventilation, and ridge vent ventilation. And we want to make sure that the attic is working properly as a system. So if we see a lot of mold in the attic space or organic growth on the underside of the roof deck or on the rafters, that kind of will tell us that that we have a ventilation problem, and we also may have an insulation problem. A lot of the older homes won't be insulated. They won't really be tight. So high moisture from the just general living in the home is going to migrate up to the attic space. And if there isn't proper ventilation, that moisture is going to settle on the roof framing or under the roof deck. And that's going to create a condition, that is conducive to mold growth. And that's something obviously home inspectors are going to want to watch out for sure. So we're not going to go that in depth here regarding mold and the moisture conditions that because we can spend all day on that. But I just really want to kind of give you guys an overview of what a good home inspector is going to be looking for regarding mold in the house that you're thinking about buying. So home inspectors, we're definitely going to be looking for any type of organic growth in the basement, in the attic, in the bathrooms, in kitchen cabinets, and closets in the home. So that's our first clue. We're also going to be using our nose, and we're going to be trying to detect any kind of musty or moldy odors, because these musty, moldy odors are, generally mold outgassing, and we don't want that because that can really affect negatively the air quality in the home. We don't want to have people breathing in a lot of mold spores where they can, have negative effects, regarding their health. Now, it's true that not all people are affected the same way with mold, and there's really no sort of safe level of mold, but mold is everywhere. So, my house has mold. If I put a test here, we're gonna find some level of spores for sure. Outside air has spores. So it's just really the level of mold that we find in a home that can be concerning. There are certain thresholds that we look for regarding mold testing in a house. And, we can do mold testing in a couple of ways. We can do surface testing, which is a very simple way to find out if a growth in a home is a mold. And if it's high levels of mold, we would simply do a tape lift or a swab type of sample. It's very simple, it's inexpensive, and it gives us some information regarding what the substance is. And the more information you have as a buyer, the better decisions you can make, and possibly ask the seller maybe to fix these problems. There's also air quality testing where we use a spore trap. And a spore trap is a device in which we use a vacuum pump to suck air in through. And what happens is the mold spores attach to a slide inside the spore trap cassette. And that spore trap cassette goes off to an accredited environmental laboratory for analysis. And the laboratory determines at what level the mold spores are in the home. Now, the important thing about doing air quality testing in a home is that we also need an outside control sample. And so the outside control sample is what's used to determine if there's anything anomalous inside the living space, in the area that we're testing. So take, for example, a basement. We would test the outside air and use that as a control. So that would be sample number one. And sample number two would be the subject area. Say, take, for example, a basement rec room. So we would utilize that sample too. We would send them to the lab, and the lab would utilize the outside sample and understand what's in the outside air and determine if there's anything sort of a big deviation between the outside and inside air. And it would tell us the spore counts per cubic per cubic meter of air inside the house. And then we would be able to sort of direct you in a way that, hey, this is in the normal range, this is sort of in the medium range, or this is really high, and this deserves some additional investigation or possible remediation. So those are a couple of things in some of the home inspectors here in New Jersey. We have that in our toolbox. We have the kits and the equipment and the vacuum pumps to do that type of testing, as well as taking samples from the various areas if you want to, as a home inspection customer. I'm a firm believer in you're spending a lot of money in a house here in New Jersey, and you know, spending some money on mold testing is definitely going to add another layer of information for sure. So those are the things we're going to look for, and also in attic spaces, I really take a close look at the roof deck and the roof framing. I kind of use a flashlight and drive that beam down, and a lot of times you'll find the mold sort of under and at the eave areas of the house. It'll be black or green or sometimes white. And, that's part of the attic inspection. I consider it part of my inspection, to look for mold in the house. I'm sure other home inspectors have the same philosophy. But it's important. Just because it's not required doesn't mean that it's not necessary. And I don't want to have a client, say, hey, John, why didn't you tell me about the attic? We went up there, we see these black substances on the underside of the roof. Like, why didn't you tell me that could possibly be mold? I don't want to be that person, to sort of, rest under the guise of, that's not my job, because I do think it's my job. It's my job to, if I'm knowledgeable in these things, my job is to educate my buyer regarding, whatever information I can intelligently disseminate, and regarding mold or other environmental hazards that I understand and I'm capable of inspecting for. So it's important to understand that you don't really want mold in your house, and the reason being is that mold creates spores, and we don't want to be breathing high levels of these spores for a long period of time. And usually it's the elderly or the very young who are more vulnerable to high levels of mold in homes. But over the course of a long time, a person with a regular healthy immune system, can be also affected by these symptoms. I've done home inspections or mold inspections, for people who are really sick in their homes with mold, and we've done the testing, and we do a lot of times find out that when we do the air testing, that the home does have high levels of mold spores, levels that are far above what is typical. And we don't want to have that, if at all possible. So there are certain things that we can do regarding that, and air testing is one of them. And just simple screening is another thing, because I've been in homes where everything looks pristine, and then we do an air test in the basement, and then you're like, you wonder what's going on, because you're 3 times the level of what is expected in the basement for some certain molds. I've had this done many times. So if you're spending a fortune on a house here in New Jersey, it's advantageous just to do this kind of screening, even though everything looks good. It's because you never know. It's super important to do that. That's really all I have regarding mold. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds. It's becoming a long video. But if you guys have any questions regarding mold and the mold inspection process or the mold testing process, just let me know. You can find me at LookSmart Home Inspections, LookSmart Home Inspections. My name is John Martino. And if you have any questions, certainly give me a call. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.